I need your help this morning. When you think of the word home, what other words come to your mind? Family, okay, that's a good one. What was that? Comfort, yes, amen. What else? Food, yes, there we go, yes. What else? Love, okay, that's good. Bed. Interesting. We'll come back to that. Yes. You know, when I think of home, high five? Wi-Fi. We have Wi-Fi in Michigan. What is that? Yes. See me afterwards. We'll work this out. Yes, that's right. When I think of the word home, particularly when I think about the times when I was living at home, many of the same words come to my mind. I think of food. My mother, if she were sitting here right now, she would readily confess that she's not a great cook, but she can make granola like nobody's business, and it smelled great if you woke up smelling the granola, or French toast. That I knew it was going to be a good Sunday if there was French toast in the air. Friends. You know, if you have a home somewhere, usually it indicates you've had some time there. And so outside of your immediate family, you can probably meet with friends fairly easily if you are at home. For me, my dog was there. Home was where the dog was. Sometimes we would have various dogs over the years, but it was always good to come home and see whatever dog we had coming to meet me, lick my hand and pet them, etc. If I was with my dad and my stepmom can feed an army at any meal. I never feared about bringing friends home because there always was going to be enough food. And yes, my bed. For those of you that travel, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When I go to a hotel, it doesn't matter if someone paid $500 for the hotel or $42.73 at Motel 4.5. It doesn't matter. They see me coming and they say, okay, put the tall guy in the room with the hole in the middle of the bed and his feet will hang off the end, right? That's my story. But when I go home, the bed is made for me. I sleep better at home than any other place. When you put all of these things together, family, friends, good food, pets that are me, and a good place to sleep, that place is no longer just a house, is it? It is home, sweet home. Now, take that and contrast it with this. In the middle of my junior year of high school, I was informed by my mother and stepfather that we were moving. I'd only been a semester at Monterey Bay Academy in Central California. Monterey Bay was the place to go. If you were a kid at that time, maybe still today, if you were in Central California and you were going to high school, Monterey Bay was the place to be. And I was thrilled to be there, and then I got this word. Actually, after Christmas break, we're moving. I'm like, oh, no. You see, my stepdad at the time, he worked on the shuttle program, worked for Lockheed on the space shuttle, and when Challenger exploded, there was no longer a space shuttle for the West Coast. And so quite literally, there was an office filled with engineers and programmers, and they fired every one of them except for my stepdad, and they said, we'll fire you too unless you move to Florida. I'm like, oh, man. So we loaded up, we went to Florida, and I went to Forest Lake Academy there in Apopka. And I kid you not, we drove up. All my stuff was there in the back of the car, in this rental car. We pulled into the parking lot. My mom went to the business office, unloaded whatever amounts of cash were needed there, and came back out. We unloaded my stuff, and they said, I'm sorry, but we've got to go to sign on a condo. Love you. You got to picture me there. I'm in the parking lot. I've got bags in either hand, surrounded by these boxes. My family is driving away, and I'm staring up at the guys' dormitory. I don't know a soul on this campus. I've never even been to my room. It's kind of like this depressing Norman Rockwell picture here, staring up like that. I got to tell you, at that moment, I was not feeling home sweet home. And some of you know exactly how that feels. and you're feeling it right now. Some of you are freshmen at Andrews University. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Some of you are transfer students. You're brand new here, or maybe you're new for some other reason, but I'm thinking particularly of the student mindset here, because I know what that feels like. And if you are new on our campus here, it may be that you are feeling a little nervous. Maybe you're feeling a little lost. You don't know where things are on campus. You don't know where many things are. You don't know the people that you're sitting next to perhaps right now. And maybe it's the first time that you've been away from home for any given length of time. And maybe, just maybe, you might even be feeling a little bit scared. And this definitely does not feel right now like home sweet home. Well, if you're feeling that way this morning, I know how you feel, because I'm a freshman too. I just got here. I'm a freshman at Andrews University, and there have been times in the last 6 weeks when I have felt nervous. There have been times when I have gotten lost. I have gotten lost in this building before. Okay? And I'm the pastor here. I should know how to find this. I've taken staircases and I end up somewhere. I thought, oh, this is embarrassing. I have no idea where I'm at right now. Okay. I'm surrounded by people. There's a few old friends that I've seen. There's lots of other people that I'm just getting to know. And maybe there's even been some times when I have been tempted to feel a little bit scared. But I know that I am going to be okay. And if you're new here, or if you're just feeling far from home for whatever reason, maybe even a little scared this morning for whatever reason, I want you to know that I know that you can know that you will be okay too. Let me show you how. If you have a Bible, take a look please at Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Daniel chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. We're going to read a very famous story here this morning. In fact, even if you're not a Christian, if you've never read the Bible before, I can guarantee you that there are phrases in English idioms that have come from this story. The Bible is a very influential book. And right here, we're going to read one of the most famous of all. It has to do with a guy by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. Let's take a peek here. Daniel chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned, here comes the list, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Pause there, please. A little background will be helpful here if you're not familiar with this story. King Nebuchadnezzar lived a long time ago, about 2,700 years ago. And he was the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. That was the new Babylonian Empire, which of course infers there was a Babylonian Empire before. And indeed there was. Hundreds of years earlier, there had been a Babylonian Empire, but it had fallen from out of power. Nebuchadnezzar's grandfather, Nabopolassar, about, 626 or so, is when he came to power. He began this reinvigoration of the Babylonian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar put it on steroids. Babylon became the biggest power in that part of the world. It's a huge amount of territory that they covered. And Nebuchadnezzar, in chapter 2 of Daniel, has a dream. Now, if you've read through this, you know this is a fairly significant dream. And Nebuchadnezzar knew it, but he couldn't understand it. In the dream, he saw a statue. And the statue had this head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then feet that were made of iron mixed with clay. A very bizarre thing to put a heavy statue on. And in the dream, this rock comes out of the heavens and it strikes the feet of the statue. The statue crumbles and the rock becomes this kingdom that would never come to an end. Nebuchadnezzar wakes up in a cold sweat. He believes he has received a message from the gods, but he doesn't know what it means. Long story short, he calls in all of his advisors. They can't help him. He threatens to kill them all, as was vogue in those days for kings. And Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, show up and say, well, hold on a second. Before you take the heads off of all these guys, let us pray about it. We'll get back to you. They pray, God reveals it, and then they share the interpretation with King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, if you studied this, you're familiar with the interpretation. The head of gold, that represented King Nebuchadnezzar. Begins his kingdom essentially 605 BC. Powerful, but not powerful enough to stay forever. Following him would come another nation, the Medes and the Persians, representing this chest and arms of silver. This belly, the thighs here of brass, this represented the Grecian Empire that would come. 330 BC, Alexander the Great with his great army sweeps over the earth, takes over, until about 168. The legs of iron represent Iron Rome. Rome's power was so great that it lasted for about 4 centuries. In the 5th century AD, it deteriorated into the toes. The feet here mixed with clay, iron together. They did not cleave together, to use the King James verbiage there. They became what we know today as the nations of Western Europe. And it is in the times of this divided authority in Europe that Jesus is to come back. We do indeed live in the last days. Jesus is going to come, that rock that crushes all other kingdoms, but itself becomes a kingdom that fills the whole world and will never pass away. May that day be soon. Nebuchadnezzar is given this incredible dream. And with this incredible dream, you would think that Nebuchadnezzar would be thrilled. He'd be honored. He would be humbled that the great God of heaven has given him this dream. Unfortunately, the only thing bigger than the dream was Nebuchadnezzar's ego. And he says to himself, you know what, I can improve upon this. I can have prophecy my way. And he decides he's going to make an image, not of gold, silver, brass, etc., but of just gold. The message is quite clear. Nebuchadnezzar has no intention of ever seeing Babylon fall. And in order to help the world understand how serious he is, he makes this 100% gold-covered statue, and he invites all of his rulers, anyone who is anyone. If you've got any authority, you are commanded to be here on the plain of Dura. Now, this would be in modern-day Iraq, fairly arid place, lots of space out there in the desert, not a lot of competition for real estate in some places. And so the plain of Dura is there. The statue is set up. Nebuchadnezzar calls all of these people. There are thousands of people there. And suddenly a hush falls over the crowd. The trumpets sound a fanfare, and the king's spokesman proclaims loudly for all to hear. Verse 4 of Daniel chapter 3. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." This is the first recorded instance in history of motivational speaking. And undoubtedly, these furnaces were there for people to see. Now, we don't know this for certain, but probably they were kilns. You see, this statue, it was not made of solid gold, almost certainly, because metallurgically speaking, you can't get 90 feet worth of gold and 9 feet to stand on its own accord. It will fall. It will mush. Gold is too soft. And so probably what happened is that they instead made a framework, an outline here, in a statue using baked bricks. And then with that shape, they overlaid it with gold, etc., and that's why it was referred to as a golden altar here. These kilns were very clearly seen. Have you ever put your hand in a kiln? Okay, you better make sure it's off and well cooled before you do. It gets mighty hot in there. Some kilns can get over 1,000 degrees. Well, this is motivating. And as promised, the music sounds. And as Nebuchadnezzar looks on with delight, a wave of humanity takes action. Like lightning, every person on the plain of Dura hits the desert sand. Face down, feet back, seemingly the whole world bowing down by the thousands to worship the glorious golden image, just as they had been commanded to do by the most powerful government in that part of the world. Does that sound familiar to anyone? You know, if you're a student of Bible prophecy, we're not going to do it today, but if we were to read in Revelation chapter 13, we would find that at the end of time, all who dwell on the earth, that's the phrase that the Bible uses, all who dwell on the earth will worship the Antichrist power. And by extension, through that, they will be worshiping Satan. And it's almost as though in Daniel chapter 3, the devil is getting a practice run for the very end of time. Universal worship done his way has long been a dream of Satan since the first time that sin enters his heart. And we can be sure that the devil took good notes that day on the plain of Dura, knowing that someday the lessons learned there just might come in handy. How pleased Satan must have been with his triumph that day, and how pleased Nebuchadnezzar must have been with his triumph as well. Until, of course, he wasn't pleased anymore. You see, in that sea of humanity bowing, there were 3 points of humanity standing. Now, this is a serious problem. It's funny, you know, even on occasions when death is on the line, people peek, don't they? You know, some of you during prayer, well, you don't have to raise your hand, but you know this happens, right? Okay, and so when they're all bowing down there on the plain of Dura, undoubtedly somebody's like, oh, wow, I've never been to one of these parties before. This is amazing. Wait, do you see that? I can't believe it. Keep your head down. Like, no, but right over there. 3 guys standing up, just 3. Thousands of people, and 3 people standing. You know, that's not the kind of thing you can hide. When you are swimming upstream and you're the only one swimming upstream, people will notice. And here on the plain of Dura, just 3 only are standing there, and the word races back to King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, the king cannot stand for this. I mean, this is blatant. This is not just in his face. It's in everyone's faces. Something must be done. And so, the king springs into action. Take a look, verse 13. It says, furious with rage. I guess as opposed to being happy with rage, I'm not sure. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? This is pretty serious, isn't it? And again, the kilns were probably right there. You know, Nebuchadnezzar was a pretty savvy politician. If you read the rest of the history of Nebuchadnezzar, he was no slouch. It is entirely possible that he anticipated there just might be somebody who would keep standing. Maybe there was a particularly large kiln, furnace, right off of the dais where the king was sitting. And maybe those 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, cast their glance over there. And they saw the furnace, and they saw the flames, and they see the heat rising, even in that desert sun, the heat rising out of the top of that. There was no doubt as to the king's intentions should they deny his request a second time. Clearly their lives were at stake. What should they do? Time out for just a moment. What would you have done? Now be careful. This is such a popular story that sometimes we skip right to the end. We put ourselves right in their sandals and say, well, I know what I would have done. We need to be careful because before we get to this part of the story, how they answered the king, The fact of the matter remains is that they had options. And if we are honest, we will see that indeed, to the carnal mind, they are very attractive options. For instance, they could have easily thought to themselves any of a number of excuses. It's just this one time. Surely God will understand. Or how about this? The king has been good to us. And of course, that's true. They got to be rulers in Babylon specifically because of what happened in Daniel chapter 2. These guys were elevated. They were powerful men themselves because of the king. The king has been good to us. We ought to respect him, and we certainly don't want to embarrass him, especially in front of all these people. Or how about this? We have loved ones to take care of. We don't want to abandon them for the sake of a little thing like this, just a few seconds on the plain of Dura. Or how about this one? I know that God doesn't like us worshiping idols. But maybe that's just a preference he has. And besides, while I'm bowing down to the idol, I'll just worship God in my mind. After all, the Bible says, man looketh on the outside, but God looketh at the heart. Oh, how the mind can bob and weave when good and evil clash and the price for us is high. What would you have done if you were standing before the nation and the king at that time? Well, what did these three guys do? Apparently, none of these rationalizations came into their heads. If they did, it's not recorded. Instead, these three friends knew their Bibles, the Bible of their day. There was no question what God had commanded them to do, and therefore God's will was crystal clear. Exodus 20, verse 4, it says, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them." So this was not rocket science. These men knew exactly what answer they were to give to the king, and without hesitation or rationalization, apparently of any kind, here is what they said. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king." And then comes what I think is one of the more powerful verses in all of the Old Testament, verse 18. "But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." What an amazing answer. Of all the things they could have said, of all the politically correct phrases, the maneuvering, "King, can we talk about this later? Right now is not a good time. We'll get back to you. My lawyers will call you." All the things they could have said, and instead they just come flat on and said, "King, we're not doing it. We don't even need to defend ourselves in this matter." Now, by the way, that's a public rebuke because they knew what had happened. Nebuchadnezzar recognized those guys when they walk up on the stage. These are the same guys that said that this gold statue isn't going to be gold, just the head. They said, "King, we don't need to defend you about this. You already know. And you can threaten us. You can take our families. You can take our office. You can take our lives. But we will not bow down to your gods." What courage, what faith, what power. And in the eyes of King Nebuchadnezzar, what foolishness. He says, "I'm not going to stand for this." And he immediately begins to take action. Take a look at verse 19. "Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed." In the Hebrew there, the attitude means his face. Somehow, he was reaching absolute boiling point here. "He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace." So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, in other words, kindling, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. And that's the end of the story. Credits roll. We're done. That is how most of the people on the plain of Dura that day undoubtedly thought. I mean, this is the end of the story, right? If even the soldiers who are supposed to be throwing these guys in, this is, by the way, this is why the strongest soldiers had to be called, because Nebuchadnezzar knew they were going to have to chuck these guys from a distance, okay? And so even the strongest soldiers in the army are now dead on the plain of Dura. Surely the message was clear. Thousands of onlookers there immediately concluded if the flames kill even those who are nearby, they must utterly and completely destroy those who are thrown within. Surely no one will disobey King Nebuchadnezzar ever again. Or will they? Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Not even the smell of fire. This is absolutely astonishing. For those of you who are new here, for those of you who are nervous or fearful, for those of you that are feeling far from home, 3 lessons from this story. Lesson number 1, there is no fire too hot for Jesus. Does not exist. There is no fire that is too hot for Jesus. Whether you are feeling just a little homesick or full-scale oppressed, whatever fire you are going through right now, Jesus is not scared of it. Jesus is flame-proof. He's the original holy fire retardant. You cannot scorch this man. For him, the fires that would otherwise torch us are like a gentle breeze, a walk in the park, a stroll on a cool summer's evening. He is not fazed by our fires. He is not harmed by them. And if he finds you in the fire, he will definitely not run away. Instead, if you invite him in, he will come right into that fire with you. And even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, if God is with you, you need fear no evil. If you're new here, if you're far from home, you need to know that Jesus feels your pain. He knows your heart. And when asked, he will come in and give you the healing and strength that he alone can give. For no fire is too hot for Jesus. Lesson number 2. When you're away from home, obey God and leave the rationalizations to the devil. When you're away from home, obey God and leave the rationalizations to the devil. Now listen carefully here. These 3 men, all of whom were young adults, quite likely what we would consider to be college age today, they all were far from home. They were not at home sweet home. Babylon was not their home sweet home. Their home sweet home lay in ruins, most likely back in Palestine. When Nebuchadnezzar came to power in 605 BC, there was a series of rage. It took several years before all of Palestine was decimated. At one of those points, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's homes were attacked. We don't know exactly what happened. It's possible that their parents were killed. Undoubtedly, they had at least friends that were killed, possibly relatives, and their houses were probably piles of rubble. They were indeed far from home. And what is true for anyone who goes far from home was undoubtedly true for them as well, and perhaps for you. When you're far from home, there are new temptations. You're tempted to feel lonely, and you want to find a way to get rid of that lonely feeling. And too often, temptations can come to us that if we were back home, they may not come our way. And we could begin to rationalize doing the wrong thing as though somehow standing for Jesus and his truth will harm us rather than help. I don't want to offend anybody. These new friends that I'm making, they're asking me to do thus and such. I don't want to offend them. Jesus said we should love people, etc. It's just this once. Surely God will understand. But the truth is that the path of obedience is the path of assurance. The path of following God is the path to freedom, including freedom from fear. You know, in the world today, there are sometimes rules that governments or organizations make that actually bring harm to your soul if you follow them. That can happen. Families can make poor rules. They have rules that are unhealthy, etc. But you don't have to worry about that with God. If God makes a rule, you can be guaranteed it is for your good and your freedom. He never makes a mistake in this regard. Follow Him when you're far from home, and the fears will drop away. True freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. True freedom is the ability to choose and to do what is right. So if you are feeling uneasy being far from home, my challenge to you, my encouragement to you, keep following Jesus. Stay true to Him. By His grace, move past the temptations to do that which in the end will only make you feel worse, and instead follow Jesus, no compromise, no rationalizations, and find the comfort and freedom that only He can bring. And lesson number 3, anywhere with Jesus is home, sweet home. Anywhere. It doesn't matter ultimately what the surroundings physically are around you. If Jesus is there, you can be at home. You know, one of the things about this story that I love, that rarely gets talked about, is the part where Nebuchadnezzar is freaking out. Okay, he's gone from being a bass to a soprano, okay? He says, oh, when I looked at it, there's 4 walking around. Walking around. Isn't that interesting? It's like they're just lounging. It's like Jesus is in his living room with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Oh, over here, this is a picture I took with Abraham and Sarah when I was there visiting them earlier. And it was a place of comfort. These 3 friends appear to have all the comforts of home just strolling around inside of this furnace. They are basking, not baking. They are lounging, not lacking. They have French toast, not burnt toast. There are friends nearby, and because Jesus is there, they are home. Now, the 1970s were a dark era. We suffered through fashions and colors and hairstyles that never should see the light of day ever again. And generally speaking, the music from the 70s was terrible, with a few exceptions. When I was a child, my parents gave me a record. I guess I probably should explain what that is for those incoming students. A record is a piece of plastic that you could put grooves on, and if you had just the right instrument on it, it would go over it and it would make noise. And I think if you go to the Horn Archaeological Museum, I think there is a record that's there on the wall. Anyway, I had a record, and it was called It Isn't Hot. And it was a story, a dramatized story of the 3 worthies in the furnace. And I'd like to share a little bit of that song with you, but I am going to need your help, okay? Do you know how to snap your fingers? Follow. Wait. We have to do this together, so follow me, okay? Keep going. It isn't hot in the furnace, man. It isn't hot, no. In the furnace, man. It isn't hot in the furnace, man. This furnace is cool. It isn't hot. Keep going. That furnace was hot and glowing red. They thought we'd burn like homemade bread. But we didn't burn and we didn't run. And God just looked and said, well done. It's cool. Cool. Yeah. We didn't burn, the song said, and we didn't run. And how come? Because Jesus was with them. And what started out as a trial by fire ended up with Jesus there being a spiritual home like no other. Students, and anyone listening who is feeling far from home, maybe in your heart you're feeling like you've been dropped off on the curb of a new place with all that is familiar and comforting driving off into the sunset. But the story of these 3 friends reminds us That even if you are walking through what seems like the fires of hell itself, if Jesus is there with you, inwardly it can be as cool as an air-conditioned living room. Your living room, as though you were surrounded by family and friends with all of the right sights and sounds and smells. So please, students, ask Jesus to live in your heart. Start your day with him. Welcome him into your heart at the beginning. Walk with him throughout the day. End your day with him. Go to church each Sabbath. We'll save you a seat. Study your Bible regularly. Be with Jesus. And you will indeed find that anywhere with Jesus really is home, sweet home. Welcome to Pioneer. Welcome to Andrews. Welcome home.